Yo, thanks for clicking on the video. So, I have just released version 1.2 of Oneiro. And for those that are new, Oneiro is a solo project of mine. It's a first-person dungeon crawler that takes place within the player's nightmares. And in this nightmare, you end up finding all these weapons, enemies, items. You can stack items and essentially become godlike with all of your abilities. And Oneiro encourages this playstyle. It's really the most effective way to take down your bosses and then end up going to the next layer of your mental labyrinth. And you do that a few times and you end up beating the game. So that's Oneiro in a nutshell. Oh, also, there's nothing at all that persists between the runs, so that's another thing to mention. Now, with that out of the way, I'd like to get into Oneiro 1.2 and what that brings to the table. And in all reality, if you've already played the game, it's probably not bringing too much for you. See, my original plan for Oneiro 1.2 was for it to be a much larger update. I wanted to include both a tutorial and a hard mode, but I decided that if the tutorial is already finished, there's not really a point in me keeping the tutorial to myself, so I've decided to put it out as Oneiro 1.2, and then the hard mode will come in Oneiro 1.3. Now, I kind of plan on making a whole other video talking about the making of the tutorial for Oneiro, because this is a strange game to make a tutorial for. It's a very free-form game, for the lack of a better phrase. Since Oneiro was designed in mind for the player to have a whole bunch of options at any given scenario, so you can't easily explain what a player should do and what they shouldn't do. So even though Oneiro isn't really lore heavy, I like to keep into the theme of the game, so the tutorial actually takes place on a couch in the player's house. So the player naps for a tutorial, or the player goes to sleep for the actual nightmare. And I figured this was probably the best way to make the tutorial thematically fitting. I'm not about to explain what every part of the tutorial is supposed to do for the player, but it does show some very important things like what pitfalls look like and what spike traps can do. And it seems like it's a good way to introduce to the player what is actually possible in this game. Which is super important for a game like Oneiro, because if you can't make it past a part, then you'll think that that's all the game has to offer and probably leave a bad review, which doesn't really help anyone. That's about it for the tutorial, so let's move on. I've also added in some extra bug fixes. The first one on the list is more of an exploit fix that was introduced in the last update, 1.1.2. 1.1.2 had added an FOV slider, field of view slider, and something really stupid that I completely glanced by was that if you're ending up running out of time, then you could just go to the pause menu, reset your field of view while you're actually waking up, and you'd end up having an infinite amount of time if you're willing to actually go through that annoying process. I fixed this with a pretty easy fix, and that was just not allowing the player to hit the pause button while they're waking up. So that shouldn't be possible in 1.2 anymore. There's been a pretty strange bug that has plagued Oneiro for quite some time, and this was that sometimes the player would go to attack and the weapon just wouldn't attack. This was caused by the code not exactly understanding when the weapons were in a transition between two animations, because there's like an idle animation, and then there's a walking animation, and Unity needs to fill in that gap between the walking and idle. So if it was between that gap, then you wouldn't attack. That was an easy enough fix, and it's working in 1.2 now. There's also been another bug that has been plaguing the game for quite some time, in which spiders just didn't reliably attack the player. They just kind of flung themselves at the player, and sometimes they wouldn't damage them, and most times they wouldn't damage them. This one is entirely caused by my poor coding I had when I was making the spider. So spiders work better now, it's all good, and they also have another little bit. It's not exactly a bug fix exactly, but I didn't know where else to fit this in. Spiders will only detect you when you're grounded now. The idea behind this is that spiders can always feel vibrations, so if you're in the air, they shouldn't detect you. I fixed a bug with the Minotaur sometimes running outside of his arena when the player teleports, and this was done if the player teleports during his dashing. He'll just run straight through the walls, and then he'll just kind of hover. He'll just defy gravity, and then that'll completely break him. You can't really do anything to him. It's just a bad bug, so I fixed that one. And that is that for the bug fixes section. There's one more section here that I just have labeled Steam, which is talking about some new Steam achievements. So the first new achievement is called the Hardy Individual, and this one is achieved by getting 300 or more max health. Which sounds like a lot of health, and it is, but if you mix it with the Lessons of Biology and the Blessed Arteries, then it should be pretty easy to reach 300. And the second achievement is called Porcupine, and you get this one by impaling a singular enemy with 3 different spears. Get it? Get it? They kind of look like a porcupine. It's funny. I'm a funny individual. Now, by normal means, I could imagine this achievement being pretty hard to get. However, there is a certain item that lets you get this one pretty easily. So anyhow, that is Oneiro version 1.2. Now, there wasn't too much to this video besides the tutorial, though I expect to make a much longer video for version 1.3, and I should be making another video talking about the tutorial itself. So I hope you guys look forward to those, and I will see you in the next video. See ya.